International Studies, where I lead the Defending Democratic Institutions project. We're very pleased today to have my former colleague, dear friend, and tremendous public servant, Undersecretary Rob Silvers, with us to talk about DHS's cyber priorities, particularly for the year ahead. And I want to just make an administrative announcement for those of you who are lucky enough to be here in person with us in the room. Should there be any kind of alarm, just look at follow a CSIS people, me and our colleagues there in the back of the room, and we will show you the way out. We always have to make that announcement first. And for all of you who are joining us online, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. I think you're in for a real treat. Rob Silvers' formal title is Undersecretary for Strategy, Policy, and Plans at the Department of Homeland Security, and that's a big job, as you might imagine. He is responsible for driving policy development and implementation across DHS's very broad range of missions, including counterterrorism, cybersecurity, our topic for today, infrastructure security, closely related, and resilience, border security and immigration, international affairs, and trade and economic security. Rob and I first worked together when I was the Undersecretary at DHS, leading the men and women working on the security and resilience of our nation's critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, as well as physical and natural disasters. He was somebody whose excellence had been recognized, and he had moved up through the department. He had worked initially at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services with now Secretary Ali Mayorkas, who brought him with him to the front office when he became the Deputy Secretary of DHS and asked Rob to come and be his Chief of Staff. He then went on to be the Acting Chief of Staff for the Secretary at the department and went back into private practice at the end of the Obama administration, and public servant that he is, went back into the fray in this administration and agreed to serve as the Undersecretary for Strategy, Policy, and Plans. And we are so pleased that Rob is there. He brings to this position then that experience in the private sector, where he was a partner at Paul Hastings. So an understanding of the world, the real world out there, not just having spent his entire career in public service. And so as he thinks about policy around these cybersecurity issues, he does so with a very, very real understanding of what companies and others who are impacted out there by the cyber threat today are going through, and what they need, and what they look to their government for. So we're particularly pleased, Rob, that you were willing to take time from an incredibly busy schedule to be with us today. And I want to start, I know we want to talk about your priorities for the year ahead. We're going to give you a chance to sort of step back, take a breath, and talk to us about what's on the horizon. But I want to start with what's on your burner right now. What are you wrestling with right now?
Thank you, Suzanne. First, thank you to you. Thank you to CSIS for having me. It's wonderful to be here and be visiting with you again. A true visionary in cybersecurity and leader in the field, and one that I've looked up to for a long time. So it's great to be here. What's on my burner now in cybersecurity are, I'd say, I put it into two broad buckets. First, how are we acting to increase the resilience of critical infrastructure companies to cyber attacks? And second, how are we deepening and making more meaningful our operational collaboration between the federal government and companies to work together shoulder to shoulder on cybersecurity? On the resilience piece, we actually just yesterday at DHS rolled out the cyber performance goals. This is a new set, I think it's a game changer. It's a new set of the highest impact security practices and controls that a company can implement, regardless of its industry and regardless of its size, that CISOs, boards can use to measure a company's progress in meeting its cybersecurity and elevating its cybersecurity, and then tracking that progress over time. We think it's going to be a game changer because, in particular, this gives a tool to smaller and medium-sized businesses, often that are in the supply chain and therefore critical to the security of the biggest critical infrastructure companies. And it gives them an excellent starting point to begin to develop a mature cybersecurity program. It was issued by CISA, our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And so we feel like it's really equipping CISOs to take this, map their programs to it, and then take it to their CEOs, their CFOs, their boards, and say, here's what we're doing. Here's where we need to make progress. I'm following a framework that CISA has issued, and I need your support to get us to where we need to be. Because everything we need to do needs to be oriented towards being practical and helpful to the companies. They are the customer for what our line of business is here. And just like Amazon is obsessed with its customers and does everything with that in mind, you have to meet your customers where they are. We are trying to meet companies where they are by sharing this kind of product with them that they can go use and grow from a cybersecurity perspective. On the operational collaboration side, I think for too long, companies and the government would get together in a room and sort of congratulate themselves for meeting and say it's great to be here, and then go back and do their own things. And our strategy is of deepening operational collaboration. We need to be shoulder to shoulder, the government and the most critical infrastructure companies, to be detecting the latest trends, responding to threats, and we've done that in two ways. The first is we've set up the JCDC, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative at CISA, which brings together over 20 of the biggest technology and cybersecurity companies in the US. And we've set up Slack channels where operators are just exchanging notes informally. Here's what I'm seeing. Is anyone else seeing this? These mitigations are proving helpful to me. You guys might want to try them. And that helps those companies, certainly. But then what we're doing at CISA is drawing up the best from that and sharing it out to the rest of the community so that everyone can have the benefit of that. And so that's what we're doing operational collaboration for: real-time incident response, preparedness. Then we have something on the back end of incidents called the Cyber Safety Review Board, where we're bringing together leading lights from the private and public sectors to do after-action reviews of the biggest cybersecurity incidents to develop lessons learned from the community and do fact-finding to see what happened. So these are the things that are on our burner right now.
Yeah, outstanding. So I want to get into some of those, particularly sort of do a little deeper dive. But I think for some of the folks that are watching, it might be a little confused about. I'm talking next week to Jen Easterly, doing a similar fireside chat, the director of CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. She's going to be talking about these cyber performance goals and the JCDC, et cetera. So it might be helpful to talk about how your office at policy relates to what the work that CISA is doing relates to CISA. And frankly, the other parts within DHS that are involved with cybersecurity as well. Like how do you see your role and how you interact with these other parts within DHS, and then how you interact with the other parts of the government that are also working in cybersecurity? Absolutely.
So cybersecurity, just like it's impacting every company, it's impacting every agency, and it's impacting every agency at the Department of Homeland Security. CISA, of course, is our quarterback for critical infrastructure cybersecurity and all the operational work that goes into that. We also have the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, or the Coast Guard, which are really important regulators in critical sectors, our transportation sectors. And we've seen regulatory activity, light touch, smart, targeted regulations over some of those sectors over the last couple years that we've driven to make sure that our rail networks, our aviation system, our oil and gas pipeline system are held to minimum baseline standards to ensure that they remain operational so Americans can get gasoline and can get from place to place. The American people expect that. My office, the Office of Policy at DHS, is the nerve center of the department that connects all of that. We bring together CISA's operational expertise in cybersecurity across sectors with our sector-specific regulators. And we devise plans and strategies that everybody can then go march out and deliver on. So for example, when we have incidents that impact those regulated sectors, like pipelines, or we're working together to bring the best of all elements together. And my office is the one that can sort of step back from the day-to-day operations and say, here's the direction of travel we need to head in to make sure we're really elevating cybersecurity across this country.
Yeah, great. And it does seem to me that this Cyber Incident Review Board is a perfect example of that, the importance of having somebody who isn't putting out the daily fires, who can step back and say, okay, what have we learned from this? You and I talked when this was first being developed and rolled out that a lot of people were talking about this as the National Transportation Safety Board for cyber. But there are really important differences. That's at best an imperfect analogy. Do you want to talk a little bit more about this review board and why it maybe isn't as helpful for people to think about it as the NTSB for cyber?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some similarities, but there are also important differences. For those who don't know, when there's an air accident in this country, the National Transportation Safety Board for decades has dispatched expert teams to find out what happened, deliver an authoritative report of what happened, and to make recommendations to the aviation industry of how to prevent recurrence. We've never had anything like that in cybersecurity. When there's a really bad cyber incident, who is looking at that, not just for the purposes of the victim company, or for a regulatory investigation or a criminal investigation? Who's looking at what happened there to then share those lessons with the whole community so everybody else can raise their tide based on the lessons learned? That is what the Cyber Safety Review Board is now doing. And we're doing it as a true private-public initiative. Half the members are from the private sector and half the members are from the key federal agencies in this space. I'm very pleased to chair this board. The other federal members are, for example, Chris Inglis, the National Cyber Director, the heads of cyber at the NSA and the FBI. And then on the private sector side, you have founders of the biggest cybersecurity companies, the world's leading expert in vulnerability disclosure and management, the head of a prominent incident response firm. And so it is a set of luminaries coming together, and it's not about regulation, it's not about punishing anyone, we don't have any authority to punish anyone. It is truly about, so it's not about accountability, it is truly about lessons learned and let's do better going forward. And we just completed over the summer our very first inaugural review on the Log4j vulnerability, the worst, most serious software vulnerability ever discovered, and which triggered probably was the biggest mass-scale incident response ever in history because virtually every organization was impacted. And we came out with 19 actionable specific recommendations, some to federal agencies, some to CISOs and network defenders, some to the academic community. We advised universities and community colleges, it's so great that you have all these computer science certification and degree programs, but it's really important you have a required cybersecurity component of those because you need to have code, secure coding practices in the minds of those who are writing code in the future. Log4j had this vulnerability, and we want to prevent that as much as possible. So we advised all colleges and universities to have a required cyber component. So it was a really broad-ranging, the report landed really, really well, and amazingly, we were able to engage and get information and interviews and data from over 80 companies across critical infrastructure sectors and security researchers, cybersecurity companies, so the community interest was really strong. and it was really a proof of concept. And this is going to be an enduring new part of the ecosystem. It's something that was missing from the ecosystem. And I'm very much looking forward to launching our second review, which I think will be here before too long.
And do you think this second review is going to be based on an incident that's already happened, or are you anticipating that you'll wait for another incident and then launch a review?
I think we have some ideas that are moving quickly down the pipeline now.
Lord knows, we got plenty of incidents to look back on and learn lessons from. So, doing that kind of after-action report is really important, and the military's understood it forever. And in cyber, we've done over the years tabletop exercises and other kinds of exercises in which we've tried to gather lessons learned. The key, though, it seems to me, is really then making sure that something is actually done with those recommendations. That it actually brings about change. And I think that will be important not only to improve our cyber security posture across the country, but also to continue to get cooperation from entities, right? If they see it as simply, as an exercise that doesn't actually produce actual results on the ground, they may be less likely to participate or be helpful in the future. So how are you positioned as Congress resourced you or other entities, somebody, to be able to do some follow-up and help with implementation, get feedback on who has implemented your recommendations?
Yeah, so we implement, it's all about the implementation, right? Or else it didn't happen. And we actually have already moved out on a number of the recommendations. So for example, CISA released some guidance on the importance of asset management in cybersecurity, which really built on some of the Cyber Safety Review Board's recommendations in that regard. Similarly, a lot of the report was about improving security in the open source software community, which is this amazingly vibrant part of the ecosystem. Incredible innovation coming out of it, but also really thinly resourced. It's volunteer-based, and it's not sufficiently resourced as a whole, that community, to ensure great security on top of the great product that is coming out. And we said those companies with resources that use and incorporate open source software need to give back in. They need to allow their development teams to spend time on maintaining and improving the security of open source software libraries. So at DHS, we've now allowed our development teams to do that. It's take a penny, leave a penny. You have to give back that way, and we've seen calls from some of the biggest technology companies echoing the CSRB report recommendations in that regard and affirming their commitment to allowing their teams to do that. So the implementation is there and just getting started. And yes, this is a new start, and so we need to build and sustain the Cyber Safety Review Board. So we are building out permanent staff. We've hired. We're going to be talking with Congress about how we can work together on appropriations and the like to really cultivate this. And the enthusiasm has been really, really high.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, you got off to a strong start with a really good use case. So well done. Another really important part of your job is on the international sphere. And I think back to the times that you and I spent in Beijing and in Washington on negotiations with the Chinese over the implementation of that 2015 agreement and trying to both build trust and improve the cybersecurity posture between our two countries. But I know that this is a big part of your job now. Do you want to talk with us a little bit about what are your priorities as you think about, there are a lot of countries out there, there's a lot going on. How do you prioritize where you put your time and attention on the international front?
Sure. The good news is there's so many countries now that are more and more interested in developing their national cybersecurity capacity and capability. That also creates challenge, right? To resource all that. And what we do is we really assess what are the highest impact plays that we can make to work with international partners to elevate cybersecurity. So, for example, I was in Israel earlier this year, and we signed an agreement with my Israeli counterparts on jointly funding cyber research and development in spaces that we felt like may not be getting as much attention but needed it. So, for example, we are now issuing grants to companies that are focusing on areas like cybersecurity for small and medium-sized airports and seaports. Because really important but thinly resourced, may not get a ton of attention in the market, but can have some kind of disruption can cause devastating effect to a local or even a national community. And so we're looking for very practical things we can do. Also on the diplomatic engagement front, you know, you mentioned China. We are in a really competitive environment where we are trying to influence other countries not to fall into the trap of building their entire economies and societies around Chinese-controlled technology infrastructure. I mean, and so our Secretary Mayorkas, was just in Singapore at the biggest cybersecurity conference that happens every year, Singapore International Cyber Week, and delivered a very stern and candid and direct message to the audience of Pacific Rim countries of, it may be that the Chinese-controlled technology is the cheapest available, but it may also be that that's not the final bill to arrive. What happens 5 years down the road, 20 years down the road, when the government of the People's Republic of China has that kind of influence and ability to pull the rug out from under your entire society? And is that a risk you want to take on? So that is a big focus of our international efforts as well.
Yeah, and that point on China is so important. I think there's been a lot of focus on Huawei and China, being an integral part of building out a communications network from a traditional cybersecurity perspective and the ease of access to that communications network. Not as much attention, I think, on this reliability issue of your ability to get to, as you say, to either have that equipment suddenly pulled out or not supported in ways that you need in order to sustain it. So really important points. And your efforts on the international front, prompt again that question of how you relate to other parts of the government. We now have, for the first time, an ambassador at large for cyberspace and digital policy at the Department of State to kind of coordinate international efforts across the government, come up with strategic plans for that. And so tell me how you envision that relationship with your office.
Yeah, so Nate Fick is in as the first ever cyber ambassador at large, Senate confirmed at the Department of State, and that is a great development. That's a great development for everybody. Cyber infuses everything now, and we want it to infuse at the highest possible level diplomatic discussions, because so much of the international effort revolves around aligning countries around joint priorities, whether it be in what we talked about with countering malign Chinese influence, regulatory harmonization, law enforcement cooperation around transnational cyber crime, you name it. And so it's actually hugely beneficial to us to have more heft on those issues at the State Department, our diplomatic colleagues, because it glides the pathway for us as the operators to then come on in and then do the work in a productive way with our partner countries. So it's great development.
Yeah, and could not come at a more timely time, given what we're seeing now. Obviously we've got the Putin's decision to march into Ukraine and the war that's going on there, and all of the sanctions that are in place. We've done a great job of bringing together a strong coalition so far to sustain that effort and support Ukraine in its efforts. But we are seeing cyber activity that is, obviously very much targeting Ukraine, but also countries outside of Ukraine that are supporting Ukraine in its efforts to repel this invasion. And so I'm wondering what role you guys are playing in that, in helping to support Ukraine, the allies in that neighborhood, what you see, what are you worried about, what's keeping you awake at night in that context, but also then here in the United States. There's a lot of talk about why haven't we seen a significant cyber incident from Russia, and I'd be curious, I'm sure you've given that a lot of thought, what your thoughts are about that and what we are anticipating, what we are preparing for.
So we haven't yet seen that kind of significant cyber incident coming out of the Ukraine conflict that's reached the U.S. It has reached Germany. We saw the attack on the satellite company Viasat, and that had physical effects, and significant ones, beyond the borders of Ukraine, reaching Germany. And we're not out of the woods yet, by any means. This conflict is still live. You don't need to read too far into the newspaper to know that it is still a very challenging situation that could escalate even further at any moment. And so we need to remain incredibly vigilant here at home. We launched something called the Shields Up campaign when it was clear that this invasion might happen. That campaign, led by CISA at our department, is the broadest reaching public awareness and outreach campaign ever in history, led by the federal government with industry. I mean, the number of classified, unclassified briefings that we have given to network defenders across our economy is breathtaking. It's amazing. The amount of information, intelligence that we've been able to rapidly declassify so that we can share everything we know with network defenders is completely unprecedented and sets a new model. And so shields remain up because this conflict is still ongoing, and it's something that we're sharply vigilant to. And so that's just the new normal.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, and we'll get into this a bit more with Jen Easley from the operational side next week about Shields Up and how sustainable is it. But you use the words a new model and the new normal. Certainly, I hope with respect to the declassification and the sharing of sensitive information that network defenders need, I certainly hope there will not be backpedaling on that, and that is indeed a new model, something we've been striving for quite some time. I think clearly there's a challenge with other elements of that Shields Up in terms of operational tempo that will be hard to sustain over the long term. But you and I lived through this, so many conversations in the counterterrorism context, right? Going back to the, before our time, the color-coded, were we ever going to come down on that heightened alert level? But even when we were there, lots of discussions about how to messages to the American public and how do you ratchet things back down so that you can ratchet them back up. I think that is, I'm sure those conversations are happening around Shields Up.
Absolutely. And, to something you mentioned there, Suzanne, I mean, CISO burnout, CISO fatigue, that is a real and serious phenomenon. We are asking so much of our network defenders, and they're just people like the rest of us. And look at 2021. That year started with SolarWinds having just been discovered. So every company kind of scrambling of, am I impacted? You then have the Microsoft Hafnium attack in March or so of 2021, really consequential and wide-ranging breach. You then have Colonial Pipeline in May, and then just as people are looking forward to getting with their families at the very end of the year, you have the Log4j vulnerability discovered in the second week, or publicly disclosed in the second week of December, and you ruin the Christmas holidays for the network defender community, which was working nights and weekends because that software was literally everywhere and had to be patched. And so we have to be mindful and real about asking people to do more, be even more ready. I mean, the truth is, if you're a critical infrastructure company, you always need to be ready. So yes, we need to think about how we talk about these things. We need to talk about it in a way that helps companies. But a part of that is equipping CISOs to have something to show their boards, their CEOs, their CFOs, I need more money. I need more headcount. I know I'm a cost center, but look at this. This is what CISA is telling us. This is what our federal government is telling us we need to do. And so talking about it in a way that allows them to parlay that into more resources, more support, that's a service we can provide.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And it's a service that could be much richer if it's informed by the data that the department will be getting through that incident reporting requirement. I feel so strongly that Congress has to give DHS the resources to take that data, do the analysis that can enrich it, and provide products back out to network defenders, in part to help justify that return on investment, right? So that they don't have to say, we're just a cost center. Here's the return on that security investment based on empirical data that we've been able to gather as a result of this requirement from Congress. So I'm a big believer in something like the Bureau of Cyber Statistics, which the Cyberspace Solarium on which I served recommended, and I hope you guys will get the funding and the wherewithal to do that. We've got just a few minutes left, and I've got a question from the audience. I should say, for those of you who are joining us virtually, there is a button on the event page where you can enter your question, and I hope you'll do that, pose some questions to Undersecretary Silvers. And for those of you who are here with us in person, I think the instruction is to write it on a card, and our team, oh, there is a mic. Okay, just walk up to the mic and ask your question. So we have a question about cyber threats from North Korea. What your thoughts are on what do you think of North Korea's cyber threats? And I would throw in there also Iran. We know that our the four countries we worry most about, we've talked about Russia, China, but also North Korea and Iran.
Yeah, so Iran and North Korea are to be taken very seriously, and that's been the case for some time. You start with Iran. You see the reports of a shadow war, cyber war with Israel. Iran has taken reckless actions in the cyber realm directed at the United States, against our financial services sector, against a dam facility in New York State, against a casino company where the owner was expressing political views with which Iran disagreed. And obviously we're still in a realm of hostile relationship with Iran. And so that is a threat actor that we are very vigilant to. With respect to North Korea, different incidents, but similar rap sheet, right?
Equally long. Right.
Equally long and notorious. Now, interestingly, they've had their share of destructive attacks. You look at the attack on Sony Pictures because of a movie that they didn't like. Back in 2014, which was really a watershed event. But they also, North Korea, they're under such severe sanctions, they are using cyber crime just to raise revenue. In the same way that North Korea sells drugs and weapons, they try to do crypto heists and the Bank of Bangladesh type hack. And so they are a danger, a serious concern when it comes to both sort of destructive attacks motivated by the geopolitical situation, and also they just steal a lot.
Yeah. So we've got this incredibly complex threat environment. We've got these bad actors who have us in their sights. I will tell you that what is keeping me awake these days is the elections, both those that are coming up, that are ongoing now in many states, and the election in 2024, and the prospect for foreign malign influence operations, not just the prospect, the ongoing foreign malign influence operations, including those that are cyber-enabled. So in the few minutes that we have left, tell me a little bit about the things that the department is doing, and how worried are you?
We're very focused on securing our election system, certainly for the midterm elections that are coming up so soon, and then beyond that as well. And we're taking that really seriously, and we're approaching it from different angles. Certainly on the cyber side, election security of core election infrastructure like voter registration in databases and voting equipment and the like. And we've been incredibly well and engaged on that with the vendor community that is in that space, as well as state and local election administrators, to really provide them an incredible level of support to secure their systems. We're also concerned about physical security at polling places, at vote tabulation centers, and the like. There have been alarming threats to election administrators who are just doing the honest work of running our democratic system in this country. And then with just some of the rhetoric that's out there, they feel threatened. And they feel they need support, and they're right. And so we've been doing a lot to provide training and support and guidance to state and local election administration authorities for protecting their people and protecting their facilities. So this is something we're all in on. We've had a plan, and we've been executing on it over the last couple of years. And then we obviously are on election day in early November are going to have our 24/7 watch operations and be in live contact across the nation with state and local election administrators to be on top of the situation. Yeah,
I'm so impressed with what I've seen over the last several years in terms of how much progress has been made particularly around securing that election infrastructure to make it more resilient against any kind of malicious cyber activity. Based on everything I've seen, I feel very confident that between DHS and the election officials at the state and local level, that is indeed well in hand. And the physical security issue is one that election officials, not necessarily for themselves personally, which is a new and very troubling thing that we're now worried about, but certainly security at the election places so that people show up, they feel very safe and secure voting. Without having a large law enforcement presence that could intimidate some people from exercising their legitimate right to vote. State and local election officials have wrestled with those issues for years, and they've got that figured out. So I think Americans should feel very confident. I think you would agree with the security of the election infrastructure, the security of our polling places, and their ability to vote. I think we have much less of a handle still around the disinformation, and that in fact the fertile ground has been laid, sadly, for folks who want to, whether foreign adversaries or domestic voices, undermine the public's trust in the legitimacy of our election process to make allegations, to make claims that could create some doubt in the minds of some Americans about how legitimate that process was. And that is the most troubling, and I think one of the most challenging to get our arms around. But I know that it's on your radar screen. I know it's on Jen's. I know it's on the Secretary's, and across government. I know that folks are taking that very seriously. So having given my little speech there, I know that we're out of time, but I want to thank you again, Rob. It's an incredible breadth just of the cybersecurity issues that are on your plate, but that you're working so hard on and really producing some really important and significant results and consequences, which doesn't surprise me a bit, because that is how I know you to work, is to produce some concrete results. So thank you again for your service to the country, and for taking time to be here today with us to help us all understand it a little bit better.
Thank you
so much.
So great to be here.